My mother ruined every relationship I had with her nasty comments, always playing innocent like she didn't mean anything by it. So, I made her experience what she'd been putting me through. My mother had this pattern with every single person I ever brought home. She'd be sweet for exactly 5 minutes, just long enough for me to relax. Then she'd start with the comments. First girlfriend in high school, she told him her acne made her lose her appetite at dinner. When he never came back, she said she didn't mean it that way, and teenagers were too sensitive. College girlfriend, mom asked her if she was using me for money since she dressed so cheap. Girl cried in my car later. Mom said it was just an observation and people shouldn't date if they couldn't handle honest questions. I'm 28 now, and I've watched mom destroy 8 relationships with her mouth. She had this gift for finding exactly what would hurt someone most and saying it with a smile. Then when they'd leave and never come back, she'd tell me they were too weak anyway, and she was protecting me from people who couldn't handle real life. The worst part was she'd always say she didn't mean anything bad. She was just talking, just being honest, just making conversation. Like words didn't have consequences. Like she could say whatever came to her mind and everyone else had to deal with it. With Alicia, it got really bad. Alicia was perfect for me. She was a veterinarian, loved hiking like I did, and made me laugh every day. My friends loved her. My coworkers loved her. Everyone loved her except Mom. First dinner with Mom, she told Alicia that working with animals must be why she smelled funny. Alicia hadn't smelled like anything except shampoo. Next time, Mom said Alicia's laugh sounded like a donkey, and maybe that's why she connected with animals. When Alicia made us dinner, Mom said it was brave to serve food that bad, and some people just weren't meant to cook. Each time when Alicia would get quiet or upset, Mom would say she was just joking, didn't mean anything by it. Why was everyone so serious these days? After 6 months of this, Alicia told me she couldn't do it anymore. She loved me, but my mother was cruel, and she couldn't spend her life being insulted. I begged her to stay, said I'd talk to Mom, but Alicia said I'd been saying that for months, and nothing changed. She was right. She left, and Mom said, "Good riddance, girl couldn't take a little teasing." That's when I decided Mom needed to understand what she was doing. I started dating again but didn't tell Mom. Met this amazing woman named Jessica, who was also fed up with her boyfriend's family treating her badly. We came up with a plan together. I told Mom I was bringing my new girlfriend to her birthday dinner. Mom got all excited, probably planning her insults already. Jessica came in full character. She was actually an actor on the side, so this was easy for her. She looked at Mom's house and said it was quaint for people who couldn't afford better. Mom laughed nervously and said it was just cozy. Jessica looked at the birthday cake Mom made and said store-bought would have been kinder to the guests. Mom said she'd been baking for 40 years. Jessica said it showed. The technique was very outdated. Every single thing Mom said, Jessica had a cutting response. Mom's job as a teacher? Jessica said those who can't do, teach. And it was sweet that Mom found her level. Mom's dress? Jessica said it was brave to wear colors that emphasized all the wrong areas. Mom's friends who came to the party? Jessica wondered aloud if Mom collected boring people as a hobby. The best part was that Jessica delivered every insult with a bright smile and followed up with she didn't mean anything by it. Just being honest. Just making conversation. Mom was getting redder and redder. She pulled me aside after an hour and said my girlfriend was horrible and rude. I asked what she meant. Jessica was just talking. Mom said Jessica was deliberately being cruel. I said Jessica didn't mean it that way, and Mom was being too sensitive. Mom actually started crying when Jessica asked if Mom had always looked so tired, or if it was just age catching up fast. I told Mom she should be able to handle honest questions if she wanted to be around my girlfriend. The party ended early because Mom said she had a headache, but I wasn't done. For the next week, I kept setting up chances to put Mom and Jessica together. Coffee on Tuesday where Jessica looked at Mom's outfit and said it was brave to wear patterns that made most people dizzy. Lunch on Thursday where Jessica asked if Mom had always struggled with small talk or if it got worse with age. Dinner on Saturday where Jessica mentioned Mom's house smelled like old people and mothballs, then smiled and said she didn't mean anything bad by it. Each time, Mom got quieter and more uncomfortable. Her face would go red when Jessica delivered another cutting comment. She'd try to change the subject or make excuses to leave early. By the end of the week, Mom started making up reasons why she couldn't meet us. She had a headache. She had plans with friends. She had to work late. This was the same woman who used to call me twice a week demanding I come over for dinner, guilt-tripping me if I said I was busy. Now suddenly she was too busy for me. The change was satisfying in a way that probably made me a bad person. Jessica and I met up at a coffee shop without the act one afternoon. She ordered a regular coffee and sat across from me, looking nothing like the woman who'd spent a week tearing my mother apart. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair in a ponytail, no makeup. I realized I'd only seen her in character before, always dressed up and ready to perform. She stirred sugar into her coffee and asked how I was holding up. I told her it felt weird but good, watching Mom experience what she'd put everyone else through. Jessica nodded and said she got it. She told me about her own family, how her dad had spent years making cruel jokes about her weight and her choices, always saying he was just being funny. When she finally called him out on it, he acted like she was the problem for being sensitive. Playing the role of my mother had felt good for her too, she said, like she was finally saying all the things she wished she could say to her own family. We talked for 2 hours and I found myself laughing at her stories, liking the way she saw the world. She was sharp and funny without being mean, at least when she wasn't playing a character. I hadn't expected to actually connect with her beyond our revenge plan. 2 weeks after the birthday party, Mom called me crying. Her voice was shaky and high-pitched, the way it got when she was really upset. She said I was being cruel to her, and she didn't understand why I was doing this. She said she was my mother, and she loved me, and I was treating her terribly. I let her talk for a minute, then I started listing every comment she'd made about Alicia. I used her exact words back at her. I reminded her about the donkey laugh comment, the smell comment, the cooking comment. I told her about the time she'd asked Alicia if she was planning to lose weight before our hypothetical wedding. I reminded her of the comment about Alicia's clothes being cheap and her apartment being small. Mom tried to interrupt, but I kept talking, going through each insult methodically. When I finished, she was quiet on the other end of the line. She finally spoke and said those situations were different because she was just being honest. She said she never meant to hurt anyone, she was just saying what she observed. I asked her how that was any different from what Jessica had been doing. Jessica was just being honest too, right? Just making observations? Mom went quiet again. I could hear her breathing on the other end, but she didn't answer. The silence stretched out for almost a minute. I waited, not filling the space, making her sit with the question. I told her I'd stop bringing Jessica around when she could explain exactly what she did wrong to all my past girlfriends. Not just Alicia, all of them. I wanted her to name the behavior and acknowledge why it was wrong. Until she could do that, Jessica and I would keep showing up. Mom's voice got sharp and angry. She said I was being ridiculous and punishing her for nothing. She said I was choosing some actress over my own mother. Then she hung up on me. We didn't speak for 3 days. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was the longest we'd gone without talking in years. My old college friend Holden called me on the 4th day. He said he'd run into Mom at the grocery store and she looked terrible. Red eyes, messy hair, like she hadn't been sleeping. She'd apparently cornered him in the produce section and complained about me for 20 minutes. She told him I was punishing her with a horrible girlfriend who insulted her constantly. Holden said he'd tried to be sympathetic, but Mom just kept going, listing all of Jessica's comments and acting like she was the victim. I laughed when he told me, a bitter sound that surprised me. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. She couldn't see that she'd been doing the exact same thing for years. Holden got quiet for a second, then admitted he always thought Mom was rough on my girlfriends. He said he'd seen her make comments over the years at parties and dinners, but he didn't realize how bad the pattern was until I explained everything. He apologized for not speaking up, for not saying something when he witnessed her behavior. He said he always figured it was just your mom being your mom, not understanding it was driving people away. I told him it was okay, that I hadn't fully understood the pattern myself until Alicia left. It was easier to excuse individual comments than to see the whole picture of what Mom was doing. Jessica and I went on an actual date the next weekend. Not a performance, not a revenge mission, just the two of us getting dinner and seeing a movie. She wore a blue dress and laughed at my jokes without it being part of an act. We talked about normal things like our jobs and our friends and places we wanted to travel. I found myself watching her across the table and realizing I was developing real feelings. She was funny and kind when she wasn't playing the role of my mother's mirror. She asked good questions and actually listened to the answers. She had this way of tilting her head when she was thinking about something that I found adorable. After the movie, we walked around downtown and she grabbed my hand. It felt natural and right in a way that surprised me. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced the following Tuesday. I opened the door and she pushed past me, her face set in angry lines. She demanded to know when I was going to stop this nonsense and break up with that awful woman. She said she'd given me time to come to my senses, but clearly I needed her to intervene. I stayed calm and told her Jessica and I were actually dating for real now. Not just for show, not just to teach her a lesson. We were together. Mom's face went pale. She stared at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. She started crying again, her hands shaking as she wiped at her eyes. She said I was choosing some actress over my own mother who only ever wanted the best for me. She said she couldn't believe I'd pick a woman who'd been so cruel to her, who'd insulted her in her own home on her birthday. I felt my jaw tighten. I told her she drove away someone who actually was best for me because she couldn't keep cruel thoughts to herself. Alicia had been perfect, and Mom destroyed that relationship with her mouth. Mom shook her head and said Alicia wasn't right for me anyway, but I cut her off. I said that was exactly the problem. She found something wrong with everyone and never once considered that maybe she was the problem. Mom insisted Alicia wasn't right for me anyway. She said she could tell the girl had no backbone from the first time they met. My anger spiked so fast I felt it in my chest. I told her Alicia had plenty of backbone until Mom spent 6 months breaking her down piece by piece. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I kept going. I wasn't letting her justify this anymore. I started naming every woman she'd driven away. Sarah from high school, who she said had bad acne. Mom tried to interrupt, but I talked right over her. Then came Rachel from college, who Mom said dressed cheap and was probably using me for money. Mom shook her head and said that wasn't how she meant it. I ignored her and kept listing them. Emily, who Mom said laughed too loud. Jessica number 1, who Mom said seemed dumb. Brittany, who Mom said had weird teeth. Mom kept trying to break in with explanations, but I wouldn't stop. I recounted all 8 women and the exact insults that made each one leave. By the time I finished, Mom's face was red and her hands were shaking. She finally screamed that maybe those girls weren't good enough if they couldn't handle a few honest observations. Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I told her that was exactly the problem. She thought being cruel was the same as being honest. She thought kindness meant weakness. Mom stared at me like I'd slapped her. She grabbed her purse off my coffee table and stormed toward the door. She yanked it open so hard it bounced off the wall. She left without another word and the door slammed behind her. I didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. Not a single call or text. It was the longest silence between us since I was a kid. Holden sent me a message on day 13. He said he'd seen Mom at the pharmacy, and she'd cornered him in the vitamin aisle. She spent 15 minutes complaining about her ungrateful son and his terrible girlfriend. Holden said she looked rough, like she wasn't sleeping well. She kept saying I was choosing some actress over my own mother. She told anyone who would listen that I was punishing her for no reason. Holden said he tried to be sympathetic at first, but Mom just kept going in circles. She wanted everyone to agree that I was being unfair. He texted that he felt bad for her, but also understood why I was doing this. I appreciated him being honest about it. Jessica came over that weekend. We were supposed to keep up the act, but when she walked in, she looked worried instead of ready to perform. She sat on my couch and asked how I was holding up. I told her about Mom not calling and Holden's message. Jessica was quiet for a minute. Then she said maybe we should ease up on the revenge. She could see it was eating at me, even though Mom deserved what she was getting. I felt defensive immediately. I told her I appreciated the concern, but I needed Mom to actually understand what she'd done. Feeling hurt wasn't enough. Mom had to see the pattern, had to recognize that her words destroyed relationships and people. Jessica nodded slowly. She said she got it, but asked if I thought Mom was capable of that kind of self-awareness. The question stopped me cold because I didn't know the answer. 2 days later, I sent Mom a text. I asked if she wanted to have lunch at that Italian place she liked downtown. I promised to come alone. She responded within 5 minutes saying yes. She probably thought I'd broken up with Jessica and come to my senses. She probably expected me to apologize for everything. The restaurant was busy when I arrived. Mom was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked tired and older somehow. Her hair wasn't styled the way she usually kept it. She gave me a tight smile when I sat down. We ordered drinks and made awkward small talk about the weather and her garden. Then I asked her to tell me one nice thing she remembered about any of my ex-girlfriends. Just one positive quality about any of them. Mom's smile faded. She picked up her water glass and put it down without drinking. She opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at the menu even though we'd already ordered. Several minutes passed and she still hadn't answered. Finally, she admitted she couldn't think of anything positive about any of them. Her voice was small when she said it. I leaned forward and kept my voice calm. I pointed out that 8 different women over 14 years had dated me. All of them were decent people that my friends liked. My co-workers got along with them. But Mom couldn't find one good quality in any of them. Not one thing she could say was nice or admirable. I asked her if maybe the problem wasn't them. Mom's face got that defensive look I knew so well. She said she had high standards for who her son dated. There was nothing wrong with that. She was protecting me from making bad choices. I told her there was a difference between high standards and finding something cruel to say about everyone who walked through her door. High standards meant wanting someone kind or ambitious or honest. What she did was search for ways to hurt people. Mom started crying right there in the restaurant. Tears ran down her face and she didn't even try to wipe them away. She said I was making her out to be some kind of monster when all she ever wanted was for me to be happy. Her voice shook and got louder. People at nearby tables were starting to look. I reminded her that Alicia made me happier than I'd been in years. Alicia was everything I wanted in a partner. And Mom drove her away with comments about how she smelled and laughed and cooked. Mom put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook and I could hear her crying even through her fingers. The waiter came by and asked if everything was okay. I asked for the check. We sat there in awful silence while Mom cried, and I felt that confusing mix of satisfaction and guilt twisting in my chest. Mom's face changed when I said that. Her hands started moving around on the table like she didn't know what to do with them. She tried to laugh, but it came out wrong and shaky. She said Alicia just wasn't the right fit and probably would have left eventually anyway. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my messages. I scrolled back to February when everything fell apart. I turned the screen toward Mom and watched her eyes move across Alicia's words. The first message said she couldn't keep coming to family dinners where she got torn apart. The second one said Mom's comments about her laugh made her self-conscious every time she opened her mouth. The third message was longer and talked about how she felt ugly and stupid and worthless after spending time with my family. Mom's mouth opened a little bit while she read. Her hand came up to cover it. I scrolled to show her more messages. Alicia wrote that she loved me but couldn't marry into a family where the mother would spend decades making her feel small. She said she'd started having panic attacks before visits to Mom's house. She said she cried in her car after every dinner. Mom pushed my phone away and her whole face crumpled inward. Her eyes got wet and red. She whispered that she didn't know Alicia felt that way. The words came out so quiet I almost didn't hear them over the restaurant noise around us. I felt something hot and angry rise up in my throat. I wanted to scream at her that of course she didn't know because she never asked and never cared. I kept my voice level instead and told her that was the whole problem. She never thought about how her words landed on people. She just said whatever came into her head and then acted surprised when people got hurt. I reminded her of every specific thing she said to Alicia. The smell comment at the first dinner, the donkey laugh, the terrible cooking, the cheap clothes, all of it. Mom sat there with tears running down her face and didn't try to wipe them away. She said she was just trying to be honest and people needed to hear the truth sometimes. I told her there was a difference between honesty and cruelty. Honesty was telling someone they had food in their teeth. Cruelty was telling someone their laugh sounded like an animal. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She closed it again and just sat there crying while people at other tables pretended not to look at us. The waiter came over and asked if we needed anything. His eyes darted between Mom's face and mine. I asked him for the check and he practically ran away to get it. Mom finally wiped her eyes with her napkin and it came away black with mascara. She reached across the table like she wanted to grab my hand, but I pulled mine back. I paid the bill and walked out while she was still gathering her purse and coat. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched her come out 10 minutes later. She looked around like she thought I might be waiting for her. I wasn't. I drove home and felt that weird mix of feelings again. Part of me was glad she finally saw what she did to Alicia. Part of me felt bad for making my own mother cry in public. I didn't know which feeling was right. Over the next few weeks, Mom called me 6 times. I let every call go to voicemail. The first message was defensive. She said I was being unfair and twisting her words to make her look bad. The second message was apologetic. She said she was sorry I was upset, and maybe she could have phrased things better. The third message was angry. She said I was punishing her for caring about my happiness and trying to protect me from bad choices. The fourth message was sad. She cried through most of it and said she didn't understand why I was doing this to her. The fifth message was bargaining. She said if I would just call her back, we could work this out like adults. The sixth message was quiet and defeated. She said she missed me and wanted to fix things but didn't know how. I didn't return any of the calls. Jessica came over one night with takeout, and I played some of the voicemails for her. She listened to all of them without saying anything. When they finished, she put down her food and looked at me. She said her friend Lily was a therapist who worked with family problems. Maybe I should talk to someone about everything that was happening. I told her I didn't need therapy. I knew exactly what the problem was, and Mom was the one who needed help. Jessica said maybe so, but I was clearly struggling too, and it might help to talk to someone neutral. I said I'd think about it, but I wasn't planning to actually go. She brought it up again a week later. Then again a few days after that. Finally, I agreed to one session just to get her to stop asking. Lily's office was in a small building near downtown. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines nobody ever read. Lily came out to get me right on time. She was younger than I expected and had a friendly smile that made me feel slightly less annoyed about being there. Her office had a couch and 2 chairs and some plants by the window. She asked me to tell her what brought me in. I gave her the short version about Mom ruining my relationships and the revenge plan with Jessica. Lily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked what I actually wanted from this whole situation with my mother. The question stopped me because I realized I didn't have a clear answer anymore. I started out wanting Mom to understand what she'd been doing to people. I wanted her to feel the same hurt she caused, but now I just felt angry and tired all the time. I told Lily that, and she nodded like it made sense. She asked if I thought making Mom feel bad was actually changing anything, or just making us both miserable. I said Mom deserved to feel bad after what she did. Lily didn't argue with that. She just asked if deserving it made it useful. Over the next few sessions, Lily helped me see some things I didn't want to look at. She said Mom's cruelty probably came from her own problems and insecurities. Maybe she felt threatened by my girlfriends and tore them down to feel more important. Maybe she learned this behavior from her own parents and didn't know any other way to be. Understanding where it came from didn't make the damage less real. It didn't excuse what Mom did to Alicia and all the others, but it helped me see that Mom probably couldn't change just because I wanted her to. Lily said I was stuck between wanting Mom to be different and knowing I couldn't force that to happen. The only thing I could control was my own boundaries and how I responded to her behavior. It was frustrating to hear, but it felt more honest than thinking revenge would fix everything. After a month of therapy sessions, I finally called Mom back. She answered on the first ring. I told her I would meet with her one more time if she agreed to listen without interrupting or making excuses. She said yes immediately. Her voice sounded desperate and hopeful and scared all at once. I met Mom at a coffee shop near her house 2 days later. She was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in, hands wrapped around a mug like she needed something to hold on to. She stood up when she saw me and tried to hug me, but I stepped back and sat down across from her instead. She looked hurt, but sat down too. She started talking right away about how sorry she was that things got so bad between us. She said she never meant for any of this to happen, and she hated that we weren't speaking. I listened without saying anything and watched her face while she talked. She kept saying she was sorry I was upset and sorry things turned out this way. But she never actually said she was sorry for what she did to Alicia or any of the others. After about 5 minutes of this, I finally interrupted her. I told her she kept apologizing for how I felt, but not for what she actually did. She looked confused and said that's what she was doing, apologizing for everything. I shook my head and asked her to tell me specifically what she did wrong. She was quiet for a minute, then said she knew her comments upset people sometimes, but she was just being honest. There it was again. The same excuse she always used. I felt my jaw tighten and told her that until she could say out loud that calling Alicia's laugh a donkey sound was cruel and unnecessary, we couldn't move forward. Mom's face got red and she said she was just joking around that time. I asked her if Alicia laughed. She didn't answer. I asked again if Alicia thought it was funny when Mom said her laugh sounded like a donkey. Mom said Alicia was too sensitive and couldn't take a joke. I felt something heavy settle in my chest because this was going exactly like I thought it would. I leaned forward and told Mom that jokes are supposed to make people laugh, not make them cry in cars afterward. She blinked at me like she didn't understand what I was saying. I explained that when Alicia left my apartment that night, she sat in her car crying for 20 minutes before she could drive home. Mom's mouth opened slightly, but she didn't say anything. I told her that's not what jokes do to people. That's what mean comments do to people. Mom looked down at her coffee and said quietly that she didn't know Alicia cried. I told her she never knew because she never cared enough to ask or notice. She never saw what happened after her comments landed because she was already moving on to the next observation. Mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said maybe some of her comments were harsher than she meant them to be. I felt a tiny bit of hope start in my chest. But then she immediately added that those girls should have been tougher if they wanted to be part of our family. The hope died as fast as it came. I sat back in my chair and just looked at her. She actually believed that. She genuinely thought the problem was that Alicia and all the others weren't strong enough, not that she was cruel. I told Mom that demanding people develop thicker skin to tolerate her insults wasn't the same as taking responsibility for being insulting. She stared at her mug and didn't respond. I waited, but she just sat there. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said she didn't know what I wanted from her. Her voice sounded small and lost. I wanted to feel bad for her, but I was too tired. I told her I wanted her to understand that words have consequences, and she hurt people I cared about. I wanted her to see that her comments weren't honest observations, they were attacks disguised as honesty. But sitting there looking at her confused face, I started to realize she might not be capable of that kind of awareness. The thought made me feel empty and sad. This was my mother, and she might never understand what she'd been doing all these years. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Neither of us touched our coffee. Mom changed the subject suddenly and asked about Jessica. She wanted to know if we were still together, or if that was just to teach her a lesson. I told her we were actually dating and I really liked her. Mom's face scrunched up in confusion. She asked how I could date someone who was so cruel to her at the birthday party. I almost laughed at the irony. I told her that was exactly the point Jessica was making, showing her how it feels to be on the receiving end. Mom shook her head and said it was different. She insisted Jessica was doing it on purpose to be mean, while she never intended to hurt anyone. I realized in that moment that Mom genuinely believed intent mattered more than impact. She thought because she didn't mean to be cruel, she wasn't actually being cruel. It didn't matter to her that people got hurt anyway. I tried explaining that impact is what matters to the person being hurt. I told her that when someone is crying because of what you said, your good intentions don't make the tears go away. But Mom kept circling back to the fact that she never meant anything bad by her comments. She said she was just trying to look out for me and make sure I didn't end up with the wrong person. I asked her how insulting every person I dated was looking out for me. She said she was testing them to see if they were strong enough for our family. I felt exhausted. We were talking in circles and getting nowhere. Every time I thought she was close to understanding, she'd loop back to her intentions being good. She couldn't see past her own perspective to understand that her intentions didn't cancel out the damage. I finished my cold coffee and told Mom I needed to go. She grabbed my hand across the table and begged me not to leave yet, but I pulled my hand back and stood up. I told her to call me when she was ready to actually take responsibility instead of just making excuses. She started crying as I walked out. The drive home was quiet. I kept replaying Mom's confused face in my mind, how she genuinely couldn't see what she'd been doing wrong. My phone rang around 8 that night. It was my Uncle Maverick, Mom's brother. I picked up and he asked if we could talk. His voice sounded tired. He told me Mom had called him crying about our fight, saying I was being cruel to her for no reason. I waited for him to take her side completely, but he surprised me. He admitted Mom had always had a sharp tongue, that he'd seen it his whole life. But then he said family is supposed to forgive each other. I felt my jaw tighten. I told him forgiveness doesn't mean accepting ongoing harm. I explained that Mom hadn't actually changed her behavior or understanding. She just felt bad that I was upset with her. There was silence on the line for a long moment. Then he admitted quietly that he'd seen her be harsh to people over the years. He mentioned his own wife had almost left him early in their marriage because Mom kept making comments about her weight. I hadn't known that. Maverick said he'd made excuses for Mom back then. Told his wife that's just how she was. But looking back, he wished he'd stood up to her. He said maybe he should have said something years ago instead of just accepting it as normal. I appreciated hearing that more than I expected to. He offered to talk to Mom about getting therapy for herself. He said maybe a professional could help her understand what family members couldn't get through to her. I thanked him for the support, but told him honestly I didn't hold much hope. Mom was so convinced her intentions were good that she couldn't see past them to the actual damage. Maverick said he'd try anyway, that she needed to hear it from someone besides me. We hung up and I sat on my couch feeling slightly less alone in this mess. Jessica came over later that week and we ordered pizza. We'd been dating for 3 months now, actually dating without the performance aspect. I was surprised by how healthy our relationship felt compared to past ones. When something bothered her, she told me directly but never cruelly. If I did something that hurt her feelings, she'd say so, and we'd talk about it. She showed me what honest communication actually looked like, the difference between being truthful and being mean. One night she mentioned that I apologized constantly for small things that didn't need apologies. I hadn't even noticed I was doing it. She said I didn't need to say sorry for every little thing, that normal mistakes were just part of being human. It made me realize how much I'd been walking on eggshells my whole life, trying to prevent Mom's comments by being perfect. Jessica helped me see what relationships should feel like, how they could be safe instead of stressful. I'd been accepting Mom's behavior as normal for so long that I didn't recognize how messed up it was until I experienced something different. Being with Jessica was easy in a way my past relationships never were, because I wasn't constantly bracing for insults or managing someone else's cruelty. I could just be myself and know she'd tell me directly if something was wrong instead of disguising meanness as honesty. Mom called about a month after our coffee shop talk. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist, which actually surprised me. Her voice was quiet and uncertain. She said Maverick had convinced her to go, that he'd talked to her for hours about how she treated people. She wanted me to know she was trying, even if she didn't fully understand what she did wrong yet. I felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. I told her I appreciated that she was going, but therapy takes time and I needed to see sustained change in how she treated people, not just apologies. She sounded hurt when she agreed. There was a long pause before she asked if Jessica and I were still together. I said yes, and that it was getting serious. Mom was quiet again, then said she hoped Jessica would give her another chance someday. I told her that was up to Jessica, not me. We ended the call shortly after. I sat with my phone in my hand wondering if therapy would actually help, or if Mom would just find ways to justify her behavior to the therapist too. 3 months went by. Jessica and I fell into a comfortable routine. She met my friends and they loved her. I met her family, and her mom was warm and welcoming, which felt strange after years of watching Mom tear people down. Jessica's parents asked genuine questions about my work and interest without any hidden barbs. Dinner at their house was relaxed instead of tense. I started to understand what normal family interactions looked like. Then Mom called asking to meet with me and Jessica together. Jessica was hesitant when I told her. She said she didn't want to be insulted again, even if Mom was in therapy. I promised her she could leave any time if Mom started up again, that I wouldn't ask her to stay and take it. Jessica finally agreed, but I could tell she was guarded, which was smart. We met at a neutral restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. Mom was already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner booth looking nervous. She stood up when she saw us, and her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at Jessica and apologized for being cold at the birthday party. She asked if they could start over. Jessica accepted gracefully, but I could see the wariness in her eyes, the way she held herself ready to leave. We sat down and ordered drinks. Mom kept fidgeting with her napkin. Then she surprised me by saying her therapist had helped her realize she was threatened by my girlfriends because she was afraid of losing me. It was the first real insight she'd shown into her own behavior. She said she knew it didn't excuse what she'd done, but she wanted us to understand where it came from. Her voice cracked when she admitted she'd spent so many years being the most important woman in my life that she didn't know how to share that space with someone else. She said every girlfriend felt like competition, like someone trying to take me away from her. So she'd found reasons to dislike them, things to criticize, ways to drive them off before they could take me from her completely. I watched her face change as the words came out. She said she'd been looking for problems with every person I dated because deep down she didn't want me finding someone and leaving her behind. She admitted she needed me to need her, and seeing me happy with someone else made her feel like she was losing her place in my life. Her voice got quiet when she explained that criticizing my girlfriends was easier than admitting she was scared of being alone. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, and hearing it hurt in a way I didn't expect. Part of me wanted to feel angry that her fear had cost me so many relationships, but another part just felt sad for both of us. I told her I was glad she could finally be honest about it, but she had to understand that being scared didn't make it okay to hurt people who never did anything wrong. I explained that Alicia and all the others weren't threats to our relationship, they were just people who cared about me and deserved basic respect. Mom started crying again and nodded, saying she understood that now. She kept repeating that she knew it was wrong and she was sorry, actually using the word sorry instead of making excuses. I didn't know if this moment would stick or if she'd go back to her old ways once the emotions faded, but at least right now she seemed to get it. The next few months were strange. Jessica and I kept seeing each other, and Mom actually tried when we visited. She'd ask Jessica about her acting work and listen to the answers without making cutting remarks. A few times she'd start to say something mean. I could see it forming on her face, but then she'd catch herself and say something neutral instead. Once she told Jessica her shirt was an interesting choice, then immediately apologized and said it actually looked nice. It wasn't perfect, and sometimes the effort showed too much, but it was more progress than I'd seen in my entire life. Jessica noticed too, and told me privately that she could tell Mom was really trying, which meant something coming from someone who'd seen Mom at her worst. Jessica and I started getting serious after about 6 months. We talked about moving in together eventually and what that might look like. I was scared the whole time that Mom would sabotage this relationship like all the others, that her therapy and promises would fade, and she'd go back to destroying things. When Christian from work invited us to dinner with his girlfriend, I decided to bring Mom along as a test. I didn't tell her that's what it was, just said we were all getting together and she should come. At the restaurant, Mom was polite to Christian's girlfriend. She complimented the girl's earrings and asked about her job without any hidden insults. She laughed at their jokes and told a funny story about her students without making anyone the target. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to say something cruel disguised as honesty, but she made it through the whole dinner being genuinely kind. After we left, Christian pulled me aside in the parking lot while Mom and the others were saying goodbye. He said my mom seemed really nice and he was glad he got to meet her. I just stared at him for a second because those words sounded impossible. Nobody had ever described my mom as nice after meeting her. I realized standing there that she actually could be kind to people when she worked at it, when she thought about her words before letting them out. It wasn't natural for her yet, and probably never would be, but she was capable of it if she tried hard enough. I started making rules after that dinner. I told Mom we'd visit once every 2 weeks instead of twice a week, and if she made any mean comments, I'd leave immediately without discussion. She didn't like the boundaries at first and said I was being controlling, but I explained that this was the only way our relationship could work. I told her I wasn't going to let her hurt Jessica or anyone else I cared about, and if she couldn't be kind, then she couldn't be around us. She got quiet and agreed, probably understanding that I actually meant it this time. The next few visits went okay. Once she said something about Jessica's cooking being too spicy, and I stood up to leave. Mom backtracked fast and apologized, saying the food was actually good, and she just wasn't used to spicy things. I sat back down but made sure she knew I was serious about the boundaries. About 8 months after our big confrontation, Mom asked if she could reach out to Alicia to apologize. She said her therapist suggested making amends with people she'd hurt, and she wanted to start with Alicia since that relationship had been so serious. I told her I could pass along the message, but it was completely up to Alicia whether she wanted to hear it. I texted Alicia that night explaining the situation. She wrote back 2 days later saying she appreciated the thought, but she'd moved on with her life and didn't need the apology. She said she was glad I was doing better, but she didn't want to reopen that part of her past. I told Mom what Alicia said, and she looked disappointed but accepted it. I understood Alicia's decision completely. Some damage doesn't need to be revisited, even if the person who caused it is sorry. I kept seeing Lily, my therapist, to work through everything that had happened. We talked a lot about the revenge plan with Jessica at the birthday party. I felt guilty about it sometimes, wondering if I'd gone too far or if there had been a better way to make Mom understand. Lily helped me see that while it wasn't my best moment, it came from years of watching people I loved get hurt and feeling powerless to stop it. She said the anger was fair and the confrontation was necessary, even if the method was harsh. I started accepting that I'd done something mean to show Mom what mean felt like, and that ultimately led to real change that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. It didn't make the revenge right exactly, but it made it make sense. Jessica and I decided to move in together after dating for a year. We found a small apartment near both our jobs and started packing. I told Mom about the move, expecting some kind of comment about the neighborhood or the size of the place or something, but she just offered to help us on moving day. When she showed up with boxes and tape, she looked at our apartment and said it had good light and seemed perfect for us. She helped carry furniture up 3 flights of stairs without complaining. She organized our kitchen while Jessica and I dealt with the bedroom, and when we ordered pizza for everyone, she ate it without saying anything about the grease or the cheap toppings. At the end of the day when she left, Jessica hugged her and thanked her for helping. Mom hugged back and told Jessica to take care of me. It felt like watching something impossible happen right in front of me. Sitting in our new apartment that night with boxes everywhere, I thought about everything that had changed. Mom and I would never have the close, easy relationship I'd wanted when I was younger. Too much had happened and too many people had been hurt for us to pretend everything was fine. But we'd reached a place where we could be in the same room without someone getting damaged. She was trying, actually putting in effort to be better, and I was enforcing boundaries to protect the people I loved. It wasn't the happy ending where everyone forgives and forgets, but it was honest. We both knew exactly where we stood and what the rules were. That felt more real and more sustainable than pretending the past hadn't happened. A few months after we settled into our routine, Mom called me late one night and asked if she could come over. She sounded different, quieter than usual, and I told her yes. She showed up at our apartment 20 minutes later with red eyes like she'd been crying. We sat at the kitchen table and she stared at her hands for a while before talking. She said her therapist had been pushing her to really think about all the relationships she'd ruined for me over the years. Mom looked up at me and said she wished she could go back and do everything differently, especially with Alicia. She said she understood now that Alicia was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, and she destroyed it because she was scared and selfish. I felt my chest get tight hearing her say Alicia's name like that. I told Mom we couldn't change what happened, couldn't undo the damage she'd done to 8 different women who just wanted to love me. But we could do better going forward, and that had to be enough. She nodded and wiped her eyes and thanked me for not giving up on her completely. A woman named Kaylee from my gym asked me out about a week later while we were both at the water fountain. She was pretty and funny, and I said yes without thinking about it. Then later that night, I realized something weird had happened. I wasn't scared about introducing her to Mom eventually. The fear that had controlled my dating life for years, that constant worry about when Mom would strike and what she'd say, it wasn't there anymore. I actually believed Mom would try to be kind now. The change felt huge, even though it was just the absence of fear. I told Jessica about it, and she smiled and said that was real progress, that I deserved to date without that weight on me. 2 years after the birthday party where Jessica played the role that changed everything, I asked her to marry me. We were hiking one of the trails Alicia and I used to go to, and I realized I wasn't sad about that anymore. I'd moved on to something real and healthy. Jessica said yes, and we called Mom that night to tell her. Mom started crying on the phone, but they were happy tears this time. She congratulated us and promised she'd be kind to Jessica's family at the wedding. She said she knew how important this was, and she wouldn't mess it up. I actually believed her, which felt like its own kind of miracle. Jessica squeezed my hand while we talked to Mom, and I knew we'd be okay. I'm not stupid enough to think Mom is completely fixed, or that she won't mess up sometimes. She's still the same person who spent years hurting people I loved without caring, but she learned that her words have real consequences, and I won't accept cruelty toward people I care about. It's not a perfect ending where everything is magically better and everyone forgives each other. It's messy and complicated, and we both have to work at it constantly. But it's real progress built on firm boundaries and her actual effort to be better. That's more than I had before when I was just accepting her behavior and watching my relationships fall apart. Now I have Jessica and a mother who tries and boundaries that protect the people I love. It's not a fairy tale, but it's honest, and honest is what I needed all along.